Hello and welcome to session number 4 of our 15-part Soundcraft VI training. My name is Gabriel Roux and today we're looking at vistonics. What is vistonics? Vistonics is this page here and the technology behind it. This is a Harman technology, and the idea of vistonics was adopted from Studer, its broadcast cousin, so to speak. And the whole idea of vistonics is where you look is where you will work. So this idea of creating this correlation between where the eyes are looking and where the hands will be working. So for instance, what makes it different to some other consoles is a lot of consoles you would push a select here at the bottom to select a channel, and then you'll push another button somewhere else to go into an EQ. And that is exactly what we didn't want to do here. The whole idea of vistonics is if I want to do an EQ, I click on the EQ, for instance there, and immediately I can do an EQ. Same with dynamics, that's my compressor, and I'm dialing down the threshold. So the concept of vistonics is creating a connection between the operator and the hardware. So we never will work in one place and look in another place. That is very important to understand because that is the whole idea behind this console, is keeping the operator on the console and allowing the operator to get from one place to another place as quick as possible. And then you would ask me, why is this important? Well, there's a very good reason why this is important. Every single time we are doing a function or pushing a button on the console or looking for a certain thing in a menu, we are essentially busy wasting time and not busy working on the mix. This is an analogy that I like to use, and it fascinates me, and I always like to talk about it or think about it or make people think about it. But very often we get to a festival and there's 5, 10, 15,000 people. And everyone is looking at the stage and enjoying the music, except one person. There's one person who is looking down at a piece of hardware, and it's the sound engineer. That's such a weird concept for me, is how often when I observe engineers, they are actually spending huge amount of time working the hardware and not actually working the music and also not enjoying the music. And it's very sad. It's very sad. So whatever we can do from a hardware design point of view to allow the operator to spend as much time as possible working with the audio passing through the console and not actually working the console. So whenever we do a function, if I want to go, that kick needs an EQ, every time I push the button and I have to select it, for instance, and select another button to go into EQ, I have pushed 1 or 2 or 3 times, I've pushed a button, and then also having to close menus. A console should allow you to go from one place seemingly to another place without needing to close menus or try and hit the little X in the corner there to close it, or have menus over each other that is blocking stuff. That stuff is taking away from the user experience, and oftentimes you don't realize it. When you work on a small console and you're trying to mix 2 or 3 channels, it's not a big deal. Even 24 channels is not a big deal. But when you're starting to work with higher channel counts, when you're trying to mix a big show and there's 120 channels coming into the console's spent, and you are now trying to also build 20 in-ear mixes, then all of a sudden the workload starts becoming a problem. And if you're pushing buttons just for the sake of pushing a button, and we're not actually working the audio that's passing through the console, but we're just trying to get from one place to another place, it can very easily become a situation where it feels like we're doing a lot, but actually we are not working on the audio at all. I see this all the time. I see massive rigs with 1 or 2 plug-in servers and the best hardware in the world, and the mix sound like nothing. So it's important that we don't fool ourselves as well. We want to make sure that when we work on any piece of hardware, especially when it comes to a console, we set it up, according to me, as simple as possible, and we make it as easy as possible for us to get from one place to another place. So I spend a huge amount of time on the layout, or how I lay out my console. Just maybe a little bit off topic, but a nice trick is that I never have my drums on my top layer, especially when I mix front of house, but almost never, even if I'm mixing monitors. The reason is that once you've got the drum sound and it's dialed in, you kind of set and forget. It's a good sound, and you maybe come back to change the sound on the snare if it's a different drummer coming in. And here and there, as the day goes on, you'll maybe change some here and there EQ on the toms, but it's not something you are mixing the whole time, like riding a lead guitar or working on a vocal. So why have it on the top layer? I like having the less important things on layers down, and then the more important things on my top layers. Another reason why that is helpful is also when I then afterwards go through my snapshots and I look at my ons and offs to make sure that the right channels are on and off. I don't have to go through all the layers if I know the things that I mix all the time, like for instance vocals and guitars and guest guitars on the top layer. And on a nice big console like a 7000, often you can fit all the stuff you mix all the time on 1 or 2 layers, especially if you're paring your channels down. So just a nice little tip to think about when mixing. So I like hardware that is simple. I always say this, I think simple sounds great. Also, I've spent a fair amount of time in the studio, and many times I would try and mic up a guitar amp with 3, 4, 5, 6 microphones and try and mic the room in weird ways, and actually all that you're doing is you're just adding phasing, and then you go back to 1 mic or maybe 2 mics, and it sounds amazing. So it just shows you simple signal paths and simple setups, which allows you to focus on what we are here to do, right? We're here to get the audio into the console as clean as possible, and then to preserve the quality of that audio throughout the whole system, up to the point where someone hears it in the in-ear or someone hears it on a monitor or on the front of house PA. So this is our vistonics screen. I'm going to now go through the screen step by step to show you everything that's in here and everything that you need to know about vistonics and the features. There is some of the stuff that I'm just going to talk about that if you've been mixing for a few years, you would know this, but I just going to throw it in there for the 1 or 2 users or operators that are completely new to audio. So when we get to that, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but just bear with me there. So what you're going to see is that the layout is very much the same as an analog console. Right at the top on an analog console, on a channel strip, we've got a gain. Then we go to EQs, and then we go to auxes, and then there's normally a section where we can put a mute or send to a group. Exactly the same thing here, so we've stuck with that methodology. So right at the top is our input section. Great, so input 1, I'm going to patch on 84, that's a kick, and then I'm going to patch another channel there. It's already patched to 6. Let me quickly get my in-ears in and plugged into this console. So what I have is I've got a Pro Tools session to do some playback from. Each of the channel strips has got 2 inputs, and the reason for that is that we can patch more than one thing to the same channel and then use this key to jump between the 2 different inputs. You can see it flipping there. I'm pushing the button on the console, and you can see we're skipping between input 1 and input 2. Right, best way to demonstrate that is to have a listen. I was going to check the level here. So there's a very aggressive kick coming through there. And if I push this button here, it's now gone over, which seems to me, sounds like a snare channel. Snare side. Great. So this allows us to then jump between input 1 and input 2 very quickly. The most common place where we will use this is with a handheld microphone. If you think about it, if we have, say, 8 vocals, these are our 8 vocals, 1 to 8, and we now want to so we patch vocal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the backup microphone we patch into the second input, so input 2 of each of these channels. So if, for instance, that vocal mic fails, or it's someone drops it and it's switched off, it's a wireless mic, then we can just push this button, and as long as the gain structure is roughly the same, we're not going to have any issues. This is very important. If you mix front of house, it's not such a big deal because you can just pull one fader down and push it up. But if you've send that specific mic to 20 in-ear mixes, to change that is not easy. So being able to just push a quick button and then have exactly the same signal chain throughout, nothing has changed on the signal chain, is really, really valuable. Great. So that's the first thing there. There's also a little button that says OSC, and it's for oscillator. There we go. Extremely loud, sorry for your ears, but that's what it does. Just a note on the oscillator, it's under the talkback section, so when we talk about talkback, but for now I'm just going to reference to it, it's here. And as long as it's on, you'll always be able to send tone there, like that. Everyone that's got in-ears in is now screaming at me. Right, why is it important to be able to have a oscillator on the channel? It is extremely important because if we are mixing, for instance, to a personal monitoring system, we need to be able to send something throughout the channel without needing someone on the stage. So if I'm working late at the venue and I need to be able to test my kick channel and it's a direct out going to a personal monitoring rig, there's only 2 ways of testing it. The one way is to have someone physically kick for me, or maybe the mic's not plugged in yet. The other way is to insert a tone on that channel. What a lot of consoles do is when you when you patch the input to your oscillator, to your tone generator, you lose your patch point, which is horrible. So you want to be able to switch an oscillator on and off to make sure that it's passing through the whole signal chain. So in this case, I'm just going to dial this down before I get some rude comments. Great, it's this channel there. So there it is. I'm just going to take it a little bit up. I'll go a little bit lower. Right, how's that? So we are just momentarily going there, and when I undo it, it goes back to the channel. So if I play Pro Tools there, there's the kick, there's the snare channel coming in, and if I now push oscillator, there's the tone. So 3 inputs on each channel. Great, that's enough tone for one day. So something to keep in mind is that when you're patching a digital input, you obviously only have the trim. It's a very generous trim, 18 up and 36 down. There we go. So you should be able to make up any gain that you want. If you, for instance, don't have gain control, or you're doing playback in this, like in the scenario that I've just shown. When you patch a preamp, obviously then you've got a gain. And there's a pad available. and there's a low cut available. Something to keep in mind is if you're patching a stage rack, this pad and this low cut is on the stage rack, which means if you are the monitor engineer and you've got control of the stage rack and you do that, you have now done low cut for everyone. So everyone is getting that low cut whether they want it or not. So in a scenario where we are sharing a stage rack, so the main is going to the monitor console, he's got gain control and also using the outputs, and the front of house console is just riding along, is getting a MADI split out and he's patching MADI signals, then we need to just think a little bit about whether we want to use this low cut right here. In a recording scenario, I would not use the low cut, I would use this here, the variable low cut. Two very nice high cuts and low cuts there. Awesome. Then next thing over is our pairing, so that's just to link two channels. It allows us to pair to the channel next to it and also down. So I'm going to quickly pair channel 7 and 8. And then we're going to jump to console view. Now these two channels are linked. It also allows us to link one down. So for instance, I can say undo that pair and link pair 8, channel input 8 to 24. So now you see these channels are not linked anymore, but these two are. So that's 24. Just going to push it all the way up so you can see. And if I go now to channel 8, you'll see these two channels are linked. So you can link to the channel next to it and also down. Very handy when you patch your keyboards this way, for instance, because it allows you now access of your keyboards and, for instance, your tracks over 2 layers. So once again, those are now linked. Not linked anymore. 7 and 8 linked. 7 and 6 linked. Or obviously, as I said, you can go down as well. Great. When you do this, you'll see there's a little format tab that came up. This allows you to flip around the channels and also go, I want left and right to be other way around. Or this sometimes happens that you have got keyboards on stage and for some reason you lose the one channel and you're mixing front of house. And they're busy sorting out the problem, but now while they're busy fixing the problem, you are only hearing piano left on the PA. And it's very apparent. So then you can say, okay, well, the first channel is working, left is working, so let's just send left to both of these, like that, to left and right, or the other way around, or you can mono sum them, right? So make it mono. So in a mix scenario, the console will be like this, and you'll be able to see, well, I'm mixing front of house, so I can say meter lock, this business, the audio is coming in, and while they're still working on it, I can just bring it over like that. So the channels are on both now. It's taking this channel, copying it over to there, and then once I see, okay, great, the guys on stage have fixed it, and the audio is now coming into 8 again, I can just undo it again. Also very handy when the patch list was done by the front of house engineer, for instance, and he's done his overheads from left to right, the way he's going to pan it. And now, the monitor engineer, obviously you want to flip it around, otherwise the drummer is not going to enjoy hearing the wrong cymbals in his ears, for instance. So then you can just flip it around there without changing any patching. Wonderful. Something you need to notice at this stage, and I said in the previous session that I'm going to highlight it, is this. All this information up here is so wonderful. It shows you about your gains, shows you a trim level there. It shows you that these two channels have been crossed over. So left is going to right, so the input of 7 is going to 8 and the other way around. It will also show you whether you've used pads. So all that information is extremely helpful. There is the low cut coming on, the phantom, the phase, and a delay. So just by looking at the console, once again, you don't even have to touch it. You can go like, oh, is there a pad on channel 7? Yes, there is, but there's nothing on 8. So obviously these two channels are not going to sound the same at all anymore because there's gain changes and low cuts and so on and so forth. So in a moment I'll be talking about EQ, and then I'm just going to come back to low cut and high cut just so you guys can hear what it does. Next thing over then is phantom. Phantom power is voltage, 48 volt, normally around there, 48, 49 volt, that's traveling down the XLR cable. So we've got audio going in the one direction, and the opposite direction we've got a voltage, and that power, that DC power, is being used to drive a little preamp in what we call condenser microphones. And if you don't know what a condenser microphone is, this is something you want to Google after the session, the difference between dynamic and condenser microphones. And they actually do need to be powered. Also some DI boxes, active DI boxes, need phantom power, so there's a little bit of electronics inside and they are driven by that power. Obviously very handy because it means if we have a DI box converting a jack to an XLR, so a high impedance signal to a low impedance signal, so we can run it over a longer distance, we don't need to now put a battery in or to put a power supply to it. So anything that can be driven by phantom power is obviously very handy, but it's something we need to switch on. So in the case of a condenser microphone or a active DI, you have to pop it on there. Something to note is there is some microphones that you can actually damage if they don't work with phantom power. But a dynamic microphone, you don't have to worry about it. You can put the phantom on, it won't damage the microphone. And most live microphones are very resilient, and you can throw them around and drop them by accident and it won't be a problem. Condenser microphones tend to be more sensitive. You want to also be careful when you're switching this on and off. If it's a really expensive microphone that you paid a lot of money for, I would have my phantoms off and then plug in the microphone and then switch it on. The phantom power doesn't just snap on. It comes in gradually, and also when it switches off gradually to not put just a load on the mic. So if it's an expensive mic, most studio mics don't like it when you just plug it in, and also some of your older microphones don't just plug it in with the phantom being on. So rather go to the console, switch off the phantom, plug in the microphone, then switch it on, let the microphone start up, and same thing at the end of the show, don't just plug everything out, switch off your phantoms. So obviously in the VI we've got the gang function that we're going to talk about later on, but you can just gang the whole console. Now everything on the console is linked, every single channel, right? And you can just go to your phantoms, switch them off before the crew start disassembling the stage. Then we've got a phase invert. Right, so what's happening here is we've got an oscillator duplicated over two channels, and I'm going to put one of these channels out of phase by using the phase invert. So at the moment I can't see that because I haven't patched anything input there. Just going to do that. Channel 22, I'm going to phase invert for now. Like that. So this channel here is in phase, and this channel here is out of phase. Let's have a listen at what happens. So these two are cancelling each other out. If I do this, it's going louder. If they're in phase with each other, exact opposite will happen. Now it's getting louder by 3 dB. Out of phase. If I can get them exactly the same. Dead quiet. So you can see signals coming in there, but we're not hearing anything because this channel is an exact opposite of this one, and they're cancelling each other out. Why is this happening? Because sine waves are very simple things, right? That's a sine wave. It starts at 0, goes up to its peak, crosses over 0, goes down and up again, and those two amplitudes are exactly the same. So what happens, if we remember from school, if we've got a positive sine wave like this, and we've got exactly the opposite, if we add those two together, we will lose everything. This can happen on a console, and there's one scenario where it can happen very easily, and that's in the case where we've got more than one snare microphone, because the one mic is at the top of the snare and the other mic is at the bottom of the snare. So essentially, everything that is being picked up by both of these microphones will to some degree be out of phase with each other. So if I had to put a tone generator here and I get the distance exactly the same and the mics are exactly the same and they are carbon copies of each other, we will get a huge amount of cancellation. Now, cancellation can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing. If we're cancelling out all the nice tone and low mids of our snare, it's a bad thing. If we're cancelling out noise, that can maybe be a good thing. So understanding phasing is extremely, extremely important if you want to be a really good sound engineer. As important as it is to get good source on each and every channel, as important it is to understand how phasing work and to think about it when you mix. Because essentially, as soon as you've got more than one microphone, you have to some degree have phasing. So on a drum kit with your 16 microphones, there can be a huge amount of phasing. So understanding what the mic does and how it works and how you place it can actually change your drum sound massively. This is a very interesting thing. I don't know if this has happened to anyone ever. You'll sit in the studio and you've mic'd up the kit and you listen to your kick drum, sounds amazing, snare sounds amazing. Oh, we've got another mic here on the kick. Make a nice blend there, 2 or 3 mics on the snare, get a nice sound there, and we get our toms sorted. And then all of a sudden, when you put everything together, you go like, wow, that doesn't actually sound that good anymore. When I isolate just 1 or 2 of the mics, they sound great. When I have all the mics open, it doesn't sound so good anymore. The reason is that phasing that's happening between, for instance, our tom mics or between our tom mics and the overhead mics is actually taking away a lot of our audio. So the metering still looks the same. We look at the meters, yeah, it looks great. But tonally, we've lost a lot. So oftentimes using less mics is better. Obviously in a recording scenario, if you're recording for someone else, you want to get all the options on the table. But when it comes to mixing the audio down, use only what you need. If a mic doesn't sound good, why put it in the mix, right? When you click this, you are flipping the phase over 180 degrees. So it's an exact opposite. So in the case of a snare bottom, that needs to be in. There's one more thing I want to say about phasing. How do you know if 2 microphones are in phase with each other? So for instance, on the kick, we use a kick in and kick out, or a snare, we use I normally use a condenser and a dynamic and another dynamic underneath. So normally about 3 mics, sometimes 4 mics, most of the time 3. How do you know if those mics are working together? It's a very quick little easy test that you can do. And just for the sake of time, I'm not going to pause audio now. But if these are your 2 kick channels, what you can do is you can bring the one up and then listen to it, make sure EQ it as you please. So say that's your brighter one and this is your duller one, bring in the movement, for instance, or whatever tickles your fancy. EQ that, do the compression on it, and then switch them on and off. If you are gaining level, it means they are in phase, and if the tone's getting better, whatever that might be, then it's a good thing. If that mic sounds amazing and you bring this one in and then all of a sudden it's thin, it means those 2 microphones are out of phase. This is the patch point for input 1, and this is the patch point for input 2. It's right here. So you click on this little button here, And this is not a touchscreen, this is an actual little button. I have to show it on the screen, and the only way for me to show it really nicely is to put some light on it. It's an actual little button right there that you have to push. So let's quickly recap. If we want to go to layer B and we want 17 to be mic input 1, it's like that. And we want 18 to be mic input 2, we do it like that. And then we can decide, oh, we not want a second input, so to undo it we just say none. Look out for these nones, they're all over the console. It's very handy when you've got an output that's going to 5 or 6 different destinations, just to go none, then it's undone. So we've patched these two channels, and what we haven't done is we haven't given it a name. Let's do that. That's the next thing over, is channel label. Once again, we use the little button to expand it because there's a little plus. Expand it, and let's say it's keyboard left. The long label is the label that we'll see here. There's the patch point once again. We can see it's input, and it's RO5, and it's a mic input, and it's number 7. So that information is really handy, being able to see that. So the long label is this, and the short label is this label here. I always label both. Sometimes in a church scenario it might be useful to say, well, the short label will be called RX1 and the long label is maybe Dan. Right, and then we can give it a color as well, like that. Let's go back to our keyboard scenario. So once again, push the button, keyboard. Now something that you need to know is if you want to label both the same, you label the long label, you come over to the short label and you go backspace, backspace, and it will copy that to there. Let's just say we're going to label this side as well, just to make sure we're all 100% on the same page. That's going to be keyboard, right, and backspace, backspace, and we also want to make it red. Ooh, you can just see it, but you'll see now those are red. If I change these ones to green, oh, that one went yellow and green. So normally they're gray, there's a yellow one, and a green one, and the two red ones that we've just done. Wonderful. Then we've got input delay on all our inputs and outputs. This is extremely helpful when we've got a VT coming in here, video playback, and the lip sync is out, to be able to dial in a delay to bring it back in. So input delay on all the channels. I sometimes also, when I've got guitar channels and I can hear the phasing is a problem, I would delay one of the sides, either to make it a little bit wider or to fix that phasing problem. If you do it slightly front of us, you can obviously do it. Sometimes if you do it on the monitor console, the guitarist will hear it and he won't like it because then his stereo delays will be out. At the moment, you'll see it's in milliseconds. We can, however, change that. We can say it's in meters. So for the front of house engineer, that will probably be helpful. And obviously some countries we use feet and inches, so it's right there. And you can obviously switch it on and off. The reason why there's 2 rotaries for delay is this is to get it roughly in. So say we need to go to 25 milliseconds, but it's not 25, it's 25.25. We'll use that one to get it spot on. It's very difficult with the mouse, but yeah, 25.26. Yeah, close enough. Great, then the next tab down is EQ. They are normally on, so you don't have to switch them on, but you can, however, switch each band off separately, like that. Or you can switch the whole thing on and off. So if it's highlighted, obviously it means it's on. If it's gray, it means it's off. And if you've done an EQ, I'm just going to do something crazy there. There's a little button that says flat all. I'm going to talk about EQs in a moment, just to explain what an EQ is and dynamics and so on. So it's going to be a little bit of theory in there for everyone that's new to audio. So EQs, dynamics, these are our bus sends, auxes and groups, and I've these are matrices at the moment, so they're not coming up. And then right here is where we find our pans, also where we find the option to send it to left and right and center, and we're going to talk about this in a moment. But for now, let's just quickly talk about an EQ. Okay, so I know this is not directly related to Soundcraft training, but I still felt that I just want to talk about it for a few minutes. I'm going to try and keep it quick and brief. It's because so many people ask me, how do you EQ? And it's one of those questions that are not very easy to answer, because it takes a lot of years to understand exactly how EQs work and actually how dynamics work. And everyone's got a slightly different understanding about it and uses slightly different. But I'm going to show you a few pointers that some people showed me when I got started, and it helped me immensely. And I'm going to quickly use just a trusty old dynamic microphone that I've had for years. It looks a bit banged up, but it still does the job. Let's first listen to what an EQ is. So I'm going to go to channel 40, and I'm going to patch mic 1. And obviously I need to pull up the gain. So in this case, I'm just going to guess and go straight to 32. There we go. So this channel at the back is channel 1. And I went to patch input patch in 1 patch, and I selected mic 1. If I unselect it, it's not patched anymore. So that is how we make a connection between the physical hardware and the channel. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk on this mic now. I'm going to switch off my little head-worn microphone. 222. The first thing I want to do, I can hear there's a lot of low end that I don't want there because of the proximity effect. I'm talking very close to the microphone, so I want to get rid of some of that. So I'm going to obviously go to the tool that does that, which is low cut. 222, 122. That doesn't sound nice anymore. It's too much. We need to take some of that away. 222, 122. Let's find the sweet spot. 2, 1, 2. And it's about there. So I've EQ'd this microphone millions of times. So for me, it's not extremely hard to EQ it. I normally know where the problem areas are. And what I do is when I EQ something is I want it to sound either as close as possible to the original, what my vocal sounds like when it's not mic'd, right? Same when it comes to instruments. I want the kick to sound like a kick drum, right? So obviously we can manipulate it for genres, but a good starting point is, what does a kick sound like? So if we're hearing tones that shouldn't be there, then we can EQ it. Obviously, first thing to always do is to rather go to the source, listen to the source, how does it sound, move the microphone, get the mic in the right place, get the gain in the right place, and then worry about EQing. So it's not, jumping on the EQs is not the first thing we do. But I'm talking quite close to this mic, and there's a lot of low end, and I'm hearing a lot of nasalness, that thing there. So how do we get rid of the nasalness? 1, 2, that thing. 2, yeah, yo, that thing there. We go and look for it. So just a side note, don't do this on a big PA because you can blow boxes. Put on a smaller system, and if you're taking care of the level, it's not too loud. What I do is I boost it, and I sweep through the frequencies, and I listen out for that specific nasalness. 222, 122, yep, 1 2, and it's very apparent there. 222, between 700, 222, yep. I'm gonna say it's kind of there, and then I'm gonna cut it. 122, 122, and immediately it sounds a lot closer to my vocal. Now we can still clean it up a bit. We can say, well, we want it a little bit brighter, or we want it a little bit duller. Some people like bright vocals, so they'll make it a little bit brighter. Boosting is always the last thing that I do. I always try to cut first, so I'll see if I take some of the lows out, if it makes it sound brighter. Yeah, it does. So subductive EQing is important. So rather cut instead of boosting. So we're not going to just jump on the highs and make it bright. We're first going to see what happens if we take more of that low mids out, 2 to 2, and it does make it apparently brighter. Right, 2, 1, 2, yep, 2, 2, yo, low cut's a bit rough, so I'm going to pull it slightly back. And obviously for different purposes, you're going to EQ differently. When you go out to a stream, you're going to EQ different to when you are doing front of house. And you're also going to do a different EQ when you do in-ears. So you need to think about the tone, but you also need to think about the energy when it comes to EQs. And then there's also taste. A lot of it is taste. What do you prefer? What kind of genre of music do you listen to? Some people like a really bright snare, for instance. They want the snare to really pop, so they're going to take a lot of the lows out. And then you also need to think what you have to work with. If you've got a snare that doesn't have anything in the highs, boosting the highs doesn't necessarily make it brighter, right? So you need to think about what you have to work with. So that's my little 5-minute on how to EQ something. This EQ can definitely still get a little bit better. 2 to 2, I don't like that very much, but for now, roughly, when we pop it on and off, you'll hear there's a big difference. 2 to 2, but it sounds a lot nicer with the EQ in than with the EQ out. Right, so you can say, great, we did a good job there. 2 to 2, and then obviously if we add some dynamics on there, then we're really getting somewhere. Awesome. I'm gonna actually just then go over to dynamics. On this console we have a compressor, we've got a limiter, we've got a gate, and we also have a multi-band EQ or dynamic EQ, and we all find them in this section here. So the first thing is obviously a compressor, and as soon as we switch it on and we dial down the threshold, then it'll start working. 2 2, yep, yo. We know how hard a compressor is working because of the gain reduction, and the gain reduction in this console is that the 2, yep, 2, yep. It's right there. So what does a compressor do? So what is a compressor? Signal comes in to a certain place. When it hits a certain level, we call that a threshold. We apply compression at a certain ratio. So in essence, it's this. Signal comes in, and at this level, compression gets added. Okay, so there's our channel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply very heavy compression to that channel so you guys can hear. First, the compression will be off. 2, 1, 2, yep. You can hear the louder I talk, the louder it just goes. There's at no point where there's control being added. 2, yep. So when I talk softly, it's -12. When I go loud, yep, it goes to 0, and it's probably blasting some of your computer speakers away. When I add the compression now, quite a high ratio, 1 to 5. I normally don't use such a high compression ratio, but I'm going to bring my threshold really down quite a lot. 2, yep, 1, 2. So when I whisper, the compression is not being triggered. As soon as I go loud, 1, 2, yep. That's called pumping, by the way. 2, when there's a huge amount of compression. 2, we would never do that. Normally a threshold, a ratio 1, 2, 3 should be fine on this console. And the first 2 lights on, which is about 3 dB, is already a fair amount of compression. 2,
Yep, 1, 2. So that's cool. So now I can just talk and I don't have to worry. The words that are louder are getting compressed, and the words when I talk softer, no compression is being applied. So for instance, someone who is doing a speech and is getting really excited, this is a great place to use compression. So it's allowing us to dynamically control the audio. If you don't know how compression works, this is definitely something you want to Google and hear as many people's explanation on this so you can get a firm understanding and then also play with it on a console. Okay, awesome. So we're going to move along. So something else I also have to mention about the compression on this console is the fact that there is a auto makeup gain, which means it will automatically and dynamically put back whatever we're compressing. So normally what we'll do is we'll dial in the threshold to where we see, okay, cool, we are now getting 3 dBs worth of compression and it's sounding good and it's doing the job. We can also control how fast it happens and how quickly we let off on the compression. That's our ratio. And then this is again 2 to 2, 2 to 2 on the other side of the compressor, making it louder and softer. Great. But we can also use this auto makeup gain. On this console, what it does is it dynamically adds that audio back. And this is actually something I quickly want to demonstrate with a kick drum, just so you guys can hear what it sounds like. Great, so what I'm quickly going to do is I'm just going to quickly patch a few channels. I'm going to use my gang function for this. We talk about this later on, but we can gang a whole bunch of channels together. Gang on, clear, range select. I'm just going to patch a few channels. Right. Okay. So, what I'm going to do now is to just on the kick channel flip the auto makeup gain on and off. Okay, just so you got audibly can hear what it sounds like. So I'm going to now switch it on, and you're going to hear this, because this kick has got compression on it, immediately it's going to jump out of the mix. Great, so this is a cool tool that we can use if we're working on a system and we're struggling to get something out of the mix and we dynamically want a tool to bring it out. So whenever there's compression added, we are gaining exactly what is being compressed, we can use it. And a kick is a great place. Obviously not something you can use on jazz music, but on a rock music or African gospel, to where we want the kick to be thumping, great tool to use. So wherever we have audio that is spilling through, like for instance on a tom mic, tom is a great example. So on a tom microphone, the drummer is playing the kick and the snare groove the whole time, and then every now and then he plays a tom. And then we want something to control the spill. So the rest of the time, whatever's coming through tom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
or strum 1, 2, 3 if you've got a smaller drum kit, is essentially just noise. So we want to be able to open and close something called a gate. So it's exactly what it is. Here's the scenario here. When the audio comes, we open it, and then when there's no audio, we mute it. Obviously, we only have 10 fingers, so we can't do it for the whole console. But we can use the gate to do that. And it's right there. Best way to understand a gate is to work with it and see when it opens, when it closes. It's also got a threshold, it's got a tack, a hold and a release. This is with regards to how the gate closes. Then what makes this gate wonderful is that it's also got a range, so you can decide if you want the gate all the way closed. So imagine this is the gate, the audio comes, it opens up, the audio passes through. When the audio falls under this threshold point, it closes up again. What you can also do on the range is to say if this gate is all the way closed or is slightly open. We can use an external source to trigger the gate, and there's two ways we can do it. So I'm quickly going to patch my microphone to this channel, and then you'll see if I'm tapping, so I'm patching mic 1, which is a dynamic microphone, and if I put the external key on, if I tap the mic, now this mic is opening the gate. So if I play a track quickly, we can hear that when I am tapping the microphone, the gate is opening and we can hear the drums coming through. Okay.
Then there's one other scenario, and that is the opposite of that. I'm now talking on our dynamic microphone, the Vox channel, and I'm going to now demonstrate the ducking scenario. So that is when the opposite of this, when there's a signal detected on the external key, we want the gate to go in the opposite direction. So it's going to work like this. I'm going to play the track again. So now what's happening, as soon as I talk, it is closing the gate. So it's the opposite. It's ducking now. So this is in a scenario where this is my playback happening here, and I've got my MC talking, and I want the playback to mute in a specific scenario. So I'm going to let it open quickly. As soon as I talk, it closes the gate. And now obviously we can play around with the attack, the hold, and the release to make it work nicely. 1 2 1 2 1 2. Yeah. 1 2 2. 1 2 1 2. Yeah. 1 2. So another great tool to use if you would need it.
If you want to solo what's happening in this section here, so what your high cut and your low cut sounding like, or what is coming in here, you have to push this button here, and then it will solo either to your monitors, monitor A and B, or also to your headphones. So we have a tool here called a de-esser, and essentially what it does is it only compresses the S's, so your sibilant sounds.
So we're back on our dynamic mic here. So we're going to flip our gate to the de-esser. Yep. And the only thing we really need to change here is the sensitivity. A good thing to note here is that you're either using the gate or the de-esser. 2 2 2. Yep, yo. So now it's on the gate, and now it's the de-esser. So it's either or.
So if we make the sensitivity more, we are compressing the S's more. If we pull it down, we're compressing it less. We can also set the range and the center frequency of what we want to compress. So for instance, 6, I normally find about between 7 and 8 is normally a good place to start, and we can make the queue wider if we please. Just note that it's either a gate or a de-esser. Then there's one more dynamic tool that I want to talk about, and it's something that you're not seeing under the dynamics at the moment because you first need to insert it, and that is our dynamic EQ. So I'm quickly going to go here. It's called the DSS 901. I'm going to insert EQ number 1 onto this channel, close it. We have to switch it on. And then you'll see this channel's changed. We've got this little tab here now, which is our dynamic EQ. So basically what it is a compressor that follows a EQ curve. So we can decide, for instance, we want to compress this frequency here, and it's 2.4K. There's a compression and expansion. Let's say I can compress it, and then this is the threshold within this band. We can also set a response here, and it can also be an expander. Best thing with this tool is to use it. The more you use it, the better you're going to understand it. But it's basically, instead of just having one compressor, we have 4 compressors over the frequency spectrum, and we also have an EQ curve to manipulate it, and we can switch it on and off. Works very great on vocals, and it's a very handy tool to have. Then we've got our sends, and this is something I just want to mention at this stage. You'll see that when I click this vistonics section here changes, this bottom part of the vistonics, because this is deselection mode. Now we're seeing what we call global mode. So it's aux 1 over all our channels. As soon as I select this, we are now looking at aux 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on for this specific channel. And that's very important to understand, that we've got this dual layer going with vistonics. So for instance, if we want to do pans on a aux or pre and post on a aux, we can only do it if we've selected our buses there. If we're looking at an EQ, then essentially this button is not doing anything because the EQ layer is over this layer here. So if you're in a scenario where you go like, oh, I can't see where to make things pre and post, I've hit the pre and post button, but I can't see the auxes, deselect everything. So select anywhere on the screen, click it again. Now it's deselected. Now you should see what you're looking for. This is very, very important, especially when it comes to certain functions like how I would change these mixes, these buses, 70 to 24 to be auxes. So if I click there and I come here to my output section, if anything is selected like that dynamics, it takes away the option where we can change the format and the type. So only when I deselect everything, now I can change the type to auxes, and I can decide whether they mono or stereo. Very important to remember that we've got these 2 layers. Great. Gonna go back to our inputs. So very simply, it's easy to understand that if we want to send something, we can turn this rotary to send this specific channel to this specific aux. So that's channel, that is bus 1 to 16. If I click here, it's 17 to 24. On the bigger consoles, obviously we'll have another 8 here. Great, and then just to wrap up, we've got the section right at the bottom here is where we will find our pans. We can switch it on and off. Obviously, for us to hear our audio going to left and right, this is normally selected. In a monitor scenario, we can obviously gang the whole console and then undo it and then use the left and right bus for something else. There's also a center if you have a center cluster, and then we can decide on the mode. Do we want to run a left-right or a LCR system? Obviously, when we go to LCR, we've got the width there. How much of this specific channel do we want to go center, or where in the mix we want it to sit? At the bottom here, we've got our inserts. Once again, we need to push the little button to expand it. When it comes to inserts, we've got external. So this is, for instance, to run a plugin on a channel. So we would build it like this, say setup. Say this is going to run a specific plugin and it's going to be on, say, the last channel, going out, and then also returning on the last channel. So audio is leaving the console on 64. It's maybe going to a plugin server, being processed, and then also returning on 64. We can then say undo setup, select it, and we obviously have to switch it on. This is the point at which it would leave the console. So we need to decide whether it's before or after the EQ and dynamics, or after the fader. And then something that's very handy is often, because the console is so forgiving when it comes to the gains, we would very easily clip a system on the other side. So we need to be able to trim it up and down. So if, for instance, this channel is going too hot into a plugin server, we would then have to trim it down here. Very handy. Also, we can insert a effects over a channel if we want to do that. It'll come up there. If we want to process this whole 2 channels through an effects unit, it's doable. Not that you often want to do that, but the function's there. And then obviously the BSS is our dynamic EQ. So insert is where the audio is leaving the console, going somewhere, and then coming back onto the same channel. A direct out is only one way. That's the audio just leaving the console. So for instance, we want to send this channel to a recorder. We'd be able to do it, and then also choose at what point we are picking off the audio and at what level we are sending out. This tab here refers to our vMix, and I'm doing a demo on this later on. But essentially what this is our 2 auto mix engines, and to assign this channel to any of these 2 engines, you would dial it up to 1 and just say go. I'm going to explain this in detail when we get to the session where we talk about vMix, and I'm also going to do a lovely demo. There's 2 things I quickly want to demonstrate. The one is how many places on the console we can manipulate the gain. So we've got a trim, where we can trim it up. And you'd see it will never clip. As soon as it's in the digital domain, we will never be able to clip this channel. We can gain it up and up and up, but the headroom, because of the floating point, the headroom is just moving with. So you can see, and I'll quickly play it to you, it still sounds amazing. So it's still not breaking up, we've just added a huge amount of gain. And then also we can go to our compression, switch that on, and then also gain it up there. Here's the output gain. So adding 18 dBs on the input, output gain, adding more, you see the channel still fine. Then we can still go to our direct outs and still dial it up and down there. So the console is extremely forgiving, and if you listen to this audio, it's still clean. Even though I've gained it up what is that? 18 plus 20 is 38 dBs. So it's this channel there. You can see it's all the way up to 18. And if you go to the out gain on the compressor, it's gained up there. So what can happen in this scenario now is, because I've gained it up so much, if I had to send it to a plugin server, it'll clip the input of that plugin, so we need to gain it on there. Or if this is going to a recorder, it might be too hot for the recorder, so we might need to go down, say, whatever, 12 dBs. Great, thank you for joining us for this session. That's everything on the Vistonics page, and I hope you've got a clearer understanding. Obviously, the most important thing is understanding that double layer thing, the fact that we've got one layer over the other. So when we select the EQ, we are essentially then putting that layer to the front. When we unselect it, then we're looking at the bottom layer. So remember, there's the two layers there. Yeah, thank you for watching. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Obviously, you can always mail them to me as well, or ask them on Facebook, and I would be more than happy to answer them. Great.